One. And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle show. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is David Goone, who's the CEO of tZERO. Website is tzero.com. David, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Adam, thanks for having me.
So, David, I always like to begin. Can you tell us your story, your journey, how you got to where you are today, please?
Sure. I started very briefly in my career as a CPA for a few years, and then I moved on and got into financial markets, which is what I always loved. And I started as on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange,
Nice.
trading places, screaming and yelling, that type of thing. And then I uh, moved off the floor, worked for a French bank for a while. After that, I decided to actually get into the exchange business and worked at the exchange. And I was an executive at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange for a number of years, ran a lot of their product development and marketing. I did that up until about 2000, beginning of 2001. And then I was approached by a company who was doing a startup, an internet based trading system to compete with what was then Enron Online. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So Enron Online was an interesting model. I mean, there was a big flaw, and I saw this even when I was an executive at the CME. Uh, is it's very hard to be the casino. I mean, they were the other side of every trade. You know, you would trade online with them, which was very innovative uh, in the merchant energy business primarily. But you know, if you're the other side of every trade, that works well if you get to set the odds, like you're a casino uh,
Right.
in Vegas. But when you don't get to set the odds and the markets go against you, you know, it's a recipe for disaster, and that's pretty much in a quick Cliff Notes version of it, what happened, uh, one of the many things that happened. But what we were was an electronic internet-based alternative, and we were backed by all the large oil companies and investment banks to be both a competitor to that and a company called the New York Mercantile Exchange, which traded in an open outcry for metals and oil and gas. So we launched I got there at the very beginning of that company. That happened. Um, the company started at the end of 2000. I started at the beginning of 2001, and the company grew rather quickly. The company's name was Intercontinental Exchange. We went public in I think
Nice.
2005, and then ICE as it's known.
Yeah.
And we made, I think when I was there, about 46 acquisitions, rolled up a bunch of open outcry exchanges, um, and turned them mainly electronic or all electronic. Started a data business, which became a very big business. Acquired some securities exchanges. The one everyone knows, of course, is the New York Stock Exchange, which we acquired. And then we also got into towards the end of my tenure there, we got into the mortgage business, and they're still in the process of electronifying the entire mortgage process. So it was quite successful. I think when I started, there was less than 30 employees. I think when I left, it was about 15,000. And it was just a great ride, a lot of fun. We always tried to keep the company run like a small business and have a very entrepreneurial culture. And it's just a blast, and worked with great people. Uh, and most of the people who worked for me or with me all had retired, and I was looking to retire. And I was approached by, I was actually planning to retire, and I was approached by the owners of tZERO, and they were saying uh, they needed someone to run it, and they had a great infrastructure for doing things both in private markets and potentially on blockchain. And I had some ideas of things that I wanted to do that I really couldn't do while we were at the at ICE, and particularly at the New York Stock Exchange within the securities world. So uh, I decided, for lots of reasons, why not give that a try and see if we can make these things work. So that's kind of a quick version of how I got to the seat I'm in now.
I love that story. So I don't know if you know or not, but I've had Leo Melamed on twice on the show, and I've met him in his office, and former head of the CME. For those that you don't know in the audience, and he invented or helped invent the stock market futures, currency futures, and bond futures way back when with Milton Friedman. So I mean, absolutely love your story. ICE,
And
New York
I'm
Stock
actually
Exchange.
very good
Yeah.
friends with Leo. Leo and I are very good friends. I actually worked at his firm for a very short period of time right after I left my CPA. I still keep in touch with him. And yeah, he was a real pioneer in terms of, you know, he's just like a huge force of nature in terms of what he did to get basically what are now financial futures, which are the predominant amount of what trades in the futures markets. Coalesce ideas, bring them forward, and just like a force of nature, bring them to market. So,
Yeah, so actually, you're gonna like David. You're gonna like this story. So the first time I met him, he invited me to his office, and I went over there, and he had a wall. I don't know if you've been in his office or not, but the wall of presidents. Yeah, so he showed me all the presidents that he's met, literally every single U.S. president, and then even China he's done work with. Like you said, he's an absolute force of nature. I mean, next level, brilliant person. So Louis, if you're watching, Leo, we say hi and send our love.
yeah,
So
yeah, he's a
yeah.
great guy.
So David, tell us about tZERO, please. What do you do and some of your competitive advantages?
So, so what tZERO started back in the early days of blockchain, and its history was they wanted to figure a way to trade securities on chain, on blockchain. So they set up the regulatory. They wanted to do it though regulatory compliant. So they set up all the regulatory compliant infrastructure to trade, private markets, basically private securities on blockchain and are regulated, all by the SEC. So they had all that infrastructure. They had a tough time for early on in the days to basically bring those things to fruition. Actually, bring a lot to market. We have our own stock tZERO-P, which does trade on our platform. But what we basically are is an ATS, an automated trade system, as well as a broker dealer that can trade private securities, and we can do them both off and on chain, which means we do basically right now a carbon copy, put them on the blockchain. We can do primary raise and secondary raises. So think primary raises like an IPO. We can do secondary raises, which not secondary raises, but secondary trading. We're probably the most active secondary trading platform for private securities. I think we've done 45 million shares or so. And that's when I mean secondary trading, it looks like a trading screen. Now, of course, it's not going to be as active as, the most active stocks like, you can pick your stock. It's not, 6 bid at 7, 6 bid at 7 like that, but it is active. We trade tens of thousands of shares easily every week. And we also can do these things on and off chain. And that's part of our business. And then the other part, we can also, using our regulatory infrastructure, can white label these things on other people's websites. So we can do private markets. So private stocks, we do have people come and want to trade their private stock on a secondary market actively. We also have people looking to do capital raises, and sometimes on their website, sometimes on ours. We can do things, we can tokenize them and we'll put them on chain. And then we're also going to be rolling out a product where people in, let's say, private equity or private companies can provide liquidity for their investors on a kind of one-off auction or block market, not block type market, for them to provide liquidity for their LPs if it's private equity, or employees if it's shareholders,
I love that.
company or others. So that's basically in a nutshell what we do. The other thing I got into a bit was, the idea I had originally was, let's just take, I think there's lots of non-traditional assets that are becoming privatized, and I think people want to invest in. So if you read the newspapers, people want to invest in sports teams and music and movies and other types of entertainment, athletes even, or all different types of things. So we're doing one with a hotel right now, which is offering rooms as part of its equity. So just really interesting non-traditional assets where you can put it even up on your own website, and people can buy them in a regulated securities environment, and we provide that regulatory infrastructure and advice for those firms.
I love that. That's absolutely fantastic. So let's talk about risk, David. How do you handle risk, and what are some mistakes you see people make with respect to risk management?
Okay, so that's that's a big question. So I think number one, underestimating it is the biggest issue. I think people do. So in terms of risk and risk management, I think there's a couple things, which is a little broader discussion. Is couple things. There's no diversification. Diversification is a big issue. So too much concentration, big issue, and a not uncommon mistake. I think in terms of, if you're talking about risk for a company, is not having people who are qualified, who understand risk and understand how to manage it and mitigate it. And risk doesn't go away by just hoping the market changes or hoping someone stops their position. Risk, it's you got to be, a stitch in time saves nine, I guess, is the best. When the problem starts happening, you have to address it quickly, immediately, and get on top of it. And in my history, both at whether it's at the CME or ICE or tZERO, I mean, getting on top of the issue and handling it as fast as possible is the biggest advice, I guess, I would give on that. And having the right people and knowing when, always keeping your pulse on what's going on. When things start to look a little risky, you really pay attention. A lot of times nothing ever happens, but if you're on top of it, whether it's, is one of the clearing firms, when, we're at the CME or ICE, or whether it's, an individual's, is taking too much risk in a place, being on top of it, monitoring it, having open dialogue and conversation, and knowing when you have to be, tough and make the hard decision, and whether, which could go all the way up to liquidation of things like that. Those are the things. It's just being very vigilant, and you can't. That's the one thing you can't be lazy on, is risk. Just
Yeah.
top of it. And I was fortunate. I worked for institutions that were always on top of it. I mean, really always on top of it. I also sat on some boards. I sat on the DTCC board, which clears all, as you know, securities in the U.S., as well as most of ICE's boards. And I also sat on the OCC, which clears all options, the Options Clearing Corporation board. So, all those organizations really, that's really their job, monitoring risk and making sure there's enough capital, and, basically on a real-time basis to the extent you can do that.
Love that. Most people put their head in their sand, and they hope, like you said, and I think that's it's a great way of doing the exact opposite. Just look at a risk and address it. I love that. That's really, really, really
Right.
good way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, early on in my days on the trading floor, I'll never forget. I mean, just to give you the example, and it's just burned in my memory. I was working on a guy. I was doing doing foreign currency arbitrage on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So remember very well. There was a guy who was doing it in the booth next to me on the trading floor, and he was doing a relatively low risk trade. It was and he was carrying what they call a currency forward. So he thought the position would go his way. He never told his bosses that he never got out of it. He made a mistake. He kept the position hoping it would reverse. So it was a small mistake the first day. If he just got out of it, even if it was a big mistake, no one would get mad. It happens. He just kept hoping and hoping, and a week later, and no one knew about it. It became a huge mistake, and he got not only got fired, I think he got banned.
Oof.
From,
Wow.
banned from the industry. It was just a stupid, a small mistake that he made a career defining issue by hoping and things. You can't hope. You can't hope a market's going to go back.
Right, exactly.
Get out and deal with the consequences. Just cut your losses, deal with the consequences.
I love that. Okay, beautiful. So I have a similar story. When I first started, I was working as a Series 7 broker at the time, and I had made a trading error, bought too much for the client, and whatever the case was, so thankfully, thankfully, I got out right away, told my boss, I said, hey, I made this mistake. And I think it was like 3 grand or 4 grand, which was, I think, my monthly pay at the time. And I said, it's my error, I'll eat it. And he was shocked that I was actually, I was able to man up, and so it's what his language was, and actually offer to eat the error. And I didn't know that at the time, but there's actually a entire bucket, if you will, for errors. Like there's people, it's priced in. Yeah, exactly. He's like, don't worry about it. I said, don't worry about it. I was so stressed.
Yeah, no, but that's good, right?
Yeah.
Look, I always treat, and I do this at every company I've been at, and you can ask anyone who worked with me at CME or ICE or at tZERO. I always treat the company's money as if it was my own. Like I
Yeah.
always tell people,
Yeah.
you're going on trips, you're going on expense. Do it as if it was your own dime. It's your own money. This is your money, and do that accordingly. And that's what you would do, right? The right thing to do is, if you make a mistake, you own up to it, and you take responsibility. It's okay. I mean, everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do with it, right? Do you learn from it or do you not? And not that many people learn from their mistakes.
Yeah. And then they keep repeating them. I absolutely love that. I just told my kids the other day, I said, all humans make mistakes. And I asked them, are you human? They go, yeah. I said, okay, it's okay. You make mistakes. So do I. It's okay.
Well, look, as you know, if you don't make a mistake, you really don't learn. You learn a lot more from a mistake than success.
100%.
Success, some of my best investments or best things that happen, sometimes it's just luck, right? But you don't learn from luck, right?
100%.
You learn when you make a mistake and like, why did that happen? What did I do wrong? How can I not do that again? You don't do that as much when you're successful because, just when you have a success, you don't go, why did I do that so well? People don't usually do that. But when you fail, you should be saying, what did I do wrong, and how do I make sure that doesn't happen again, or at least mitigate its odds of happening again. So
I absolutely love that. So, next question for you, David. What are some timeless lessons you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with the audience that we haven't covered yet?
we've talked about a few. So I'll tell you what worked for me the best in my career. Several things I think is surround yourself with smart people. Like I I never quite understood, and I've seen many in my life, people who would surround themselves with yes people, or surround themselves with people that or hire people that weren't so strong, so they looked better, or not challenge them. And I think it's really important to always be challenging uh, yourself, and others should be challenging you, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. I don't care who it is, whether it's somebody, lower level in a company or at the highest levels. You should always have a healthy discourse and be able to, disagree and argue. And I think you learn a lot from that. And I found that culture, especially when I was at ICE, that culture really was extremely productive and gets you um, to the right place most of the time if you surround yourself with smart people and have a healthy discourse. The other thing is, I found that it's really good to spend a lot of time listening to your whoever your customers are and get, they're doing usually in most cases what you're looking at 100% of the time, and you may be only doing that as 1%, 5%, 20, even if it's 50%, they're living it and they're looking at it from a different angle than you are. So listening to them. So a lot of times when I would develop product, I would be trying to figure out what were they trying to achieve? What are they trying to achieve? What's their motivations? And try and put yourself in their shoes and understand what their goals are. It's much more important to understand that and then go back and see how you can help them achieve their goals. You have a much better sense of success. I think where you see companies fail a lot of times is they think they know what's right for their customer. And it's a bit of field of dreams. They build it and hope the customer will come along. It's usually the other way, right? You gotta be so necessary that you're solving a problem for the customer or whoever you're trying to attract or the other business. You're trying to solve a problem that makes their life easier and reaches their goals. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
much easier sell. You don't even have to sell it if you're accomplishing them. And then along the way, if you have the right relationship, you make them feel like they're helping you design and solve that problem. So they have ownership within it. And I found that to be a very productive and helpful way that leads to success for both the client and the company you're working at or your company that you own. So spend a lot of time thinking about that and doing that. And then I think you have to, the last bit of advice is I think you have to set aside time every day to really just think about the business. We get stuck with, scheduling yourself so much, so many calls, so many things. Is like sometimes you just need to take a step back and say, what am I really trying to accomplish? Where am I sitting on everything? And try and look at things from all different sides. I always think about problems like you're looking at a gemstone. You want to look at all the different facets from all the different angles. And what am I missing? Like, what am I missing? And that's okay if sometimes you have to say, this isn't going to work and move on. I mean, that happens, but you have to try. You can't have a fear of trying. One thing that is really important is not to have, you can't have a lot of fear. You have to, I think good entrepreneurs tend to be optimists and have a bit of a fearlessness in them, and I think that's important. You can't be afraid. You got to jump in the water a lot of times. So there's
I
some
love that.
bits. There's lots of them, but those are some.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. So I mean, thousand things I can say to you, but I think let's talk about that problem or process and that fearlessness process if you can, and tie it back to risk. So when you look at the worst case scenario, in other words, you have a trade, where's your stop? And if you're okay with that, and how much you risk if you're wrong, then you can take the trade. How do you handle or help people overcome fear and become fearless and also respect risk at the same time?
Well, I think you have to actually treat them as separate things. So uh, I think you have to have the guardrails on for the risk, right? That's kind of an immutable thing in life. I mean, uh, you don't want to, it's I always love the movie with Albert Brooks when he goes to the casino and that's his whole the Lost in America, I think it was called.
Yeah.
He loses his whole nest egg, right? His wife does. She goes out and bets away their entire retirement nest egg. You can't do that, right? You can't go out and say, hey, what if I do this or what if I do that? I think you have to have, what am I willing to risk? In other words, set a parameter of what I'm willing to risk. And you have to stick with that. I think that's a little different than the fearlessness. I think the fearlessness where I see people get immobilized by it. Either they overanalyze it. Sometimes you have to jump in. Where I see fearlessness hit is that they, have a paralysis of analysis. So they
Yeah.
overanalyze everything. Uh, and they want to check every little thing before they jump in. But like jumping in the water, there is a little bit of an unknown factor. But once you're in, you figure out how to swim back. Now, that doesn't mean you take no, you don't have risk parameters. You don't close your eyes and jump in. Let's use the risk. You have to have some parameters. Like number one, the pool has to have water in it, right? I'm not going to jump in with a pool with no water, right?
Right.
That's not safe. You want to have some baseline, more than a baseline of what you're willing to lose or willing to risk, no pun intended, before you take on an endeavor or a trade. The other issue is but you can't overanalyze. The situation's never going to be perfect. Everyone wants everything perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. There's too many extraneous events. So you do have to you have to realize that you have to adapt. So another good thing I learned early on is you have to have a plan, right? Planning to fail, as how the saying goes, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever you embark on an endeavor or a trade, you have to have a plan of here's what I'm going to do. When it gets in, something's going to go wrong, right? You're getting a trade, war breaks out. There's this weird yen carry trade like we saw a few weeks ago.
Right.
What are you
Right.
going to do when something happens that, you couldn't account for? You just couldn't account for or didn't account for, or maybe you missed. Maybe it was a slight mistake. Right now, what are you going to do? So most plans always, in fact, almost every plan evolves and changes. But the fact that you've structured it and have a plan, it makes it that much easier to change. How am I going to adapt to it? You're building a house or doing a remodel. Okay, I'm going to move this wall. I'm going to
Right.
do this. I'm going to put in the cabinets. You move the wall. I'm like, oh my God, I got electrical in the way, or there's a structural issue. Okay, now what are you going to do? Am I going to spend the extra money to put in a beam? No. Am I not going to move the wall? Am I going to do? Once you have a plan, it's not that hard. Are you going to stick to your budget, or are you going to say, hey, I have a little more money and I'd rather do the move? You analyze it, right? And I think a lot of people try to have everything done perfectly ahead of time. It's just not the way life is. Nothing in life's perfect. I mean, life's things are messy. That's the nature of it. It's how you deal with it. Go in with a plan and be willing to adapt.
I love it, David. I love it, love it, love it. I was just talking to somebody the other day about why does everybody, high schools all over the world, why do they work? Because there's a schedule. People show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday doing math, and then they're doing science. And that hour they're doing math, they're just doing math. There's a plan to graduate. So anybody can go into high school. All they got to do is show up. They're going to graduate. But there's a plan, to your point. There's structure. There's some kind, opposed to the other guy in life after you're done with high school or college. It's now what? There's no plan. And what am I doing today? I don't know. What are you doing today? That kind of a thing.
Right, right. That's it.
And
It's like,
they just break down.
yeah, you can't, you at least have to have a plan. I'm going north. I don't
Right.
know exactly the road I'm gonna. It's like a map. There's,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sitting in Chicago right now. I want to go to LA. If I,
Yeah.
you have to have a map. Now,
Yeah.
some of the roads might get closed. Weather may cause you to go around a different way, but at least at least though I know where I want to end up on the West
Yes.
Coast. I want to see the Pacific Ocean. So how am I going to
Yeah.
get? And I know there's 50 different. There's no correct way to get there. Actually, there's many correct ways.
I love that. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, beautiful. And to your earlier point too about surrounding yourself with smart people, that's literally the reason why I do the show is to surround myself with smarter people and learn. And I learned so much. So thank you for sharing. I guess the mistakes part of it would not be doing the lessons, but anything else that you want to share with timeless mistakes you've seen people make and how to avoid them?
So some of the ways, you know, we just touched on a couple. Not
Yeah.
having a good plan going in. I mean, you have to have a plan. You can't just uh, shoot from the hip, right? That doesn't make sense. I think we talked about some other things. Kind of know what your whether it's risk limits, but kind of the limits of where you're willing not to go. Like, you know, I'm not going to go break my ethics, right? I'm not going to do something unethical or immoral, right?
Mhm.
That's just not going to happen, right? So you're going to have certain boundaries that you can't, um, uh, you can't avoid. But I, I think in general, don't be a, you know, networking, through the people you trust and think are smart, networking, asking them to challenge your ideas, always play the devil's advocate. I think all those things just really add up to your odds of success and succeeding being just that much higher. And don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of people where I see they get into trouble, to your question, is I guess I'd call it ego in a variety of ways. They don't want to be vulnerable and say, hey, I don't know, but I'll find out. And I see where people go wrong is they think they know better than others, or when they feel uncertain, they don't ask for help. And I think that's a hard thing for all people to do. Like, you can't be embarrassed. When I was in class, I was never afraid to ask a teacher a question. Let's go back to your high school where people don't succeed. It's like everyone in the room, it's like the emperor's no clothes. Everyone knows, hey, the guy's naked, but no one says, hey, you know, why are
Yep.
you naked? I mean, you got
Yep.
to don't be afraid to ask the question. Um, eh, but you got to let go of your ego a little. And that's where I see people really falter is when they either think they know better or are unsure and are afraid to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. That's how everyone does everything.
By the way, go back to that earlier trading story when I gave you the error that I made.
Right?
I didn't know what I did wrong. So I went to the boss. Hey, I made this mistake. Was I wrong? I was so naive. That's the only reason why it came out that way. I was like, I did something wrong. Like, what do you do? I don't know. I want to learn. Hence me showing you. I made this happen. That should have happened. It's wrong. Okay, now what? So I absolutely love that. I think that ego thing is just such a huge impediment for people because most people aren't even aware that it's hindering them from getting ahead. And then they're too proud almost to ask, and they don't want to feel that they don't know, and so on and so forth.
Everyone's afraid to feel they don't know the answer. Look, we're not, at least not yet. We're not AI computer. We don't know everything.
Correct.
So, but it is hard. And what's really hard, just to the point, is you don't have to have a. I'm not talking about people with big egos. That's a separate issue.
Yes.
I'm talking about ego in the true sense of the word. It's just like it's hard for people in general to say, I think I made a mistake, or like to your example, or I'm wrong, or you know, maybe it's just a vulnerability. I'm afraid to say I need help. I mean, everyone needs help, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that's what people are scared. I don't know. Well, that's okay. Nobody knows
Look,
everything.
it's like the best athletes. I always, people say, "Oh, I don't need a coach." It's like the best athletes in the world. Every athlete has one
100%.
or multiple coaches. They're all
Yeah.
asking for help every day, all the time. You know, every one of them. So don't be afraid. Everyone else does it.
I absolutely love it. Okay, David, let's talk about leadership. So clearly, you've been around some really great leaders. You're an excellent leader. You've got a wealth of knowledge here. I can talk to you probably for another 2 hours. But from a leadership standpoint, what are some lessons you've learned about leadership? What are some mistakes people make in the leadership position? And what makes a great leader?
So I think we touched on one of the ones, and I'll use the CEO of ICE was a good example. I think Jeff Sprecher, he allowed a culture of challenges to him, and I like to do the same thing. So you don't want to surround yourself by yes men. You don't want to surround yourself by people who just um, agree with everything you say, because back to all our points we've been talking about, you're never going to learn. You're never going to know if you're making mistakes. You're never going to challenge your thought processes. You're not going to alter your plan. So a good leader, I think, uh, lets there be a lot of discourse and challenges, almost like a Socratic method to how you go about making major decisions. You should always be questioning, like, is this the right thing? Have we looked at it all in the right ways? Does anyone else have an opinion? And a lot of times, it doesn't need to be your most senior people. Lower down, the people doing the work, similar to the thing with the clients. You know, it's the people who are doing it a day to day may know the most on how to deal with issues. I think you got to treat obviously people with respect, but you have to value their input at all levels in a company, and that's really um, really important. I think that makes for good leadership, and then you have to make sure people think their work is um, worthwhile. Forgetting pay and treating people fairly that way, all those things that you have to do that are necessary, but you know nothing's more disheartening than working on something for months on end, and then finding that it's not being used or no one cares. There's no value to all the hard work you're putting in. So you have to make sure, A, that people are doing things that are of value, but B, that they feel that they're doing things of value. And I think that's very important. So, I learned that, relatively early on, when you have people working on a technology, let's just say, they're working for months building something. They want to know that it's worked and being used. They don't want to know that, oh, you know what? I don't know if we're going to use it. Now that happens sometimes, but they have to know that there's value in what they do. And then I think you have to inspire people, and if you're excited about what you're doing, they're going to be excited, or hopefully they're going to carry on. And you have to communicate with them. You can't be in an ivory tower.
Yeah, I love that. That is really, really powerful. Okay, final question for you today, David. What is the best piece of advice you'd like to give the audience or your 30-year-old self?
My 30-year-old self. That was a long time ago. Um, don't uh, don't overanalyze uh, the situation. Be less fearful, and things tend to work out. And when they don't, there's always another. When a door closes, a window opens, or vice versa, right? There's always life is a little messy, but there's always alternatives. Rarely in life do you hit a dead end. So don't be afraid, to try. And it's okay to fail. I mean, that's the other thing I think I would say is it's okay to have failures, because that's where you're going to learn. And it happens. It happens, right? This fails, but I learned 5 things from it that I'm going to carry forward in the next thing. And some of the biggest successes I've had are due to failures that happened. But, my 30-year-old self, you never want to fail at anything, right?
Ever.
You're there thinking, oh my God,
Never.
I can't fail. That'll be the end of me. It's just like back to your college example. Oh, if I get a bad grade in this class, I'll never get a job. I mean, it's just so myopic, right? But people think that way, right? If I get a
All the time.
C,
All the
C in high
time.
school, I'm not going to get to the college I want to get into. It's like your
Right.
life isn't ruined. It's okay. You
Yeah.
could still be very, very successful, maybe more successful from that C than if you never got it. So,
Absolutely love it. Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been absolutely fantastic. CEO of tZERO. People can learn more by going to tzero.com.
yep, that would be great. And thanks for the discussion. It was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Thank you, David.